It started like any other morning. The sky was painted in soft shades of blue, with the sun slowly climbing higher, casting its golden glow over the city. Lucy Carter, a quiet and reserved woman in her late 30s, walked steadily down the crowded street. She held her white cane lightly in one hand, tapping it gently in front of her. Each tap made a soft, rhythmic sound that blended with the hum of the bustling city, a melody of car engines, chatter, and footsteps. Beside her was Max, her guide dog. Max wasn't just a pet. He was her eyes, her companion, her protector. His coat gleamed a warm golden brown, and his movements were smooth and deliberate. He walked with his head held high and his senses on full alert, guiding Lucy through the busy sidewalks with the precision of a trained soldier. The city was alive that morning, as it was every day. Business people hurried past in suits, coffee cups in hand, their faces buried in their phones. Families strolled along, their children tugging at their hands or skipping ahead with backpacks. Street vendors called out their deals, selling everything from fresh fruit to steaming hot pretzels. Lucy moved quietly through it all, unnoticed by most. To them, she was just another person going about her day, someone who blended seamlessly into the fabric of the city. But Lucy wasn't just another face in the crowd. Beneath her calm exterior, she carried stories that no one would ever guess. And Max? He wasn't just an ordinary guide dog. His sharp focus, disciplined steps, and unwavering loyalty hinted at a history few could imagine. They had been through battles, not the kind fought with fists or weapons, but battles of survival, trust, and courage. But on this particular morning, none of that was apparent. Lucy looked composed and unbothered as she walked her usual route. Her destination wasn't far, just a short walk to the library where she worked. It was a small but cozy place, filled with rows of books and the smell of paper and ink. Lucy loved her job. It was quiet, predictable, and gave her the chance to help others discover stories, something she herself cherished deeply. As they walked, Max occasionally glanced up at Lucy, checking in with her silently. His wagging tail and attentive ears spoke of the bond they shared. It was more than a bond, really it was a partnership forged in trust and understanding. Max didn't just guide Lucy, he anticipated her needs, her hesitations, and her fears. Every step they took together reflected years of training, but also something much deeper. Max wasn't just a trained animal following commands. He was a being with his own personality and a fierce sense of loyalty. He noticed things Lucy couldn't, and she relied on him in ways she sometimes didn't even realize. They passed by a park where children played on swings and slides, their laughter ringing in the crisp morning air. A few parents glanced at Lucy and Max, their expressions polite but detached. Some even smiled, but quickly looked away, as if unsure whether to say something or simply let them pass. Lucy didn't mind. She was used to being unseen, unnoticed, or occasionally pitied. As they continued down the street, a man accidentally brushed past her in a hurry. "Sorry," he called out over his shoulder, not even slowing down. "It's okay," Lucy replied softly, her voice calm and steady. She didn't need his apology. Max had already adjusted their path, smoothly avoiding any potential stumble. Lucy's ability to stay composed in moments like this wasn't just a skill, it was a necessity. Life had taught her long ago that being blind meant needing to stay calm, no matter what. Panic wouldn't help her, but Max always would. The sidewalk began to grow busier as they neared a corner known for its traffic and noise. Cars zoomed by, their horns honking as impatient drivers tried to navigate the morning rush. Lucy paused for a moment, tilting her head slightly as she listened to the chaotic sounds around her. Max stopped too, his body tense and alert. He stood still, waiting for Lucy's next move. The way he carried himself was striking, focused, purposeful, as if he were on a mission. To a casual observer, they were just a blind woman and her guide dog. But if anyone took a closer look, they might notice how Max's every muscle seemed ready to spring into action. He was constantly scanning their surroundings, his eyes darting toward anything that might pose a threat or obstacle. The light changed, and Lucy gave Max a quiet command. "Forward," she said softly. Max stepped confidently onto the crosswalk, leading her safely to the other side. They passed a group of teenagers hanging out near the entrance to a convenience store. One of them nudged his friend and whispered something, but Lucy didn't catch it. She kept walking, her focus on Max and the path ahead. For Lucy, moments like this were part of her daily life. People stared sometimes, curious or uncertain, but she paid them no mind. She had grown accustomed to the attention or the avoidance that came with her condition. Max, however, noticed everything. His ears twitched slightly, his gaze shifting toward the group for a brief moment before returning to the task at hand. As they approached their next turn, a small coffee shop came into view. Lucy could smell the rich aroma of freshly brewed coffee, mingling with the sweetness of pastries. She knew the owner, a kind woman named Maria who always greeted her warmly. "Good morning, Lucy." Maria's cheerful voice called out as they passed by. "Morning, Maria," Lucy replied with a smile, her pace steady. It was small moments like these that gave Lucy a sense of normalcy. She wasn't just a blind woman navigating the world, she was Lucy, a person with routines, connections, and her own quiet joys. But while her morning seemed ordinary, it was far from it. Life had a way of surprising Lucy when she least expected it. Today would be no different. And Max? He seemed to know. There was something in his alertness, in the way he carried himself, that hinted at a readiness for whatever might come next. For now, though, they walked on, their steps in perfect sync. They were a team, a woman and her extraordinary dog, moving through a world that didn't always see them. But soon, the world would see. And they wouldn't forget. Lucy's route, as predictable as the sunrise, took her past a part of town she didn't particularly enjoy. It was a stretch of cracked pavement and faded storefronts, with peeling paint and broken windows that seemed to speak of forgotten days. At the heart of this area stood the biker hangout, a sprawling, graffiti-covered garage that loomed over the corner like an uninvited shadow. The garage was hard to miss. Its walls were plastered with layers of graffiti, some artistic, some vulgar, and its large, rusted doors were always wide open. Inside, rows of motorcycles gleamed under dim lights, their chrome and steel reflecting the world outside. The bikers themselves were often sprawled in front of the garage, laughing loudly and shouting over the constant rumble of engines. Lucy walked her usual pace, Max by her side. She had passed this way many times before, always steady and calm, despite the noise and chaos that surrounded the place. But today, something felt different. As they approached the hangout, Lucy could hear the familiar deep rumble of motorcycles idling, the clinking of tools, and the sharp bark of laughter. The bikers were there, as they always were, lounging on their bikes or leaning against the garage walls. They were a rough-looking group, clad in leather jackets adorned with patches and chains. Their faces carried a mix of smirks and scowls, and their voices carried over the street, loud and unapologetic. Lucy kept her steps steady, her cane tapping softly on the sidewalk. Max was alert, his ears flicking at every sound, but his movements remained precise and controlled. He was focused on his job, guiding Lucy safely through the street. As Lucy neared the garage, the laughter among the bikers began to fade. One by one, they turned their attention toward her. "Hey, look who's coming through," one of them said, his voice dripping with mockery. Another chuckled. "Yeah, the lady with her big, bad dog." Lucy didn't react. She had heard worse before. Her face remained calm, her eyes hidden behind dark sunglasses, giving away nothing. But her grip on Max's harness tightened slightly, a subtle gesture that only he would understand. One of the bikers, A tall man with a scruffy beard and a cigarette dangling from his lips, stepped forward. His boots scraped against the pavement as he called out, "Hey, lady, lose your driver's license." The others laughed, a loud, jeering sound that echoed across the street. Another biker, this one shorter but just as loud, chimed in. "Yeah, better keep that mutt on a leash before he ends up under my wheels." The group burst into laughter again, their voices carrying an edge that made the moment feel heavier than it should have. Lucy's expression didn't change. Her steps didn't falter. She had faced taunts like these before, people who thought blindness made her weak, who saw her as someone to mock or pity. What they didn't know, what they couldn't see, was the strength within her. And Max? He wasn't just her guide, he was her protector, her partner, and so much more than they could imagine. Max gave a low growl, soft but unmistakable. It was a warning, a quiet reminder that he was more aware than they might think. Lucy whispered softly, her voice calm and even. "Max, hush." Instantly, Max fell silent. His growl stopped, but his body remained tense, his focus sharp. He was watching, waiting, ready. The bikers didn't notice the subtle exchange between Lucy and Max. They were too busy laughing and nudging each other, their jeers growing bolder. "Come on, lady, what's the matter?" one of them shouted. "Don't you have anything to say?" But Lucy didn't respond. She didn't need to. Her silence was louder than their words, and it carried a weight they couldn't understand. The tall biker stepped closer, his boots crunching against the gravel. He leaned slightly toward her, his smirk widening. "What's the point of a dog if you can't even see where you're going, huh?" Max's ears twitched, and his body shifted slightly, positioning himself between Lucy and the man. His posture was firm, protective, yet still under control. Lucy stopped walking. For a moment, there was only the sound of the street, the hum of cars in the distance, the occasional honk of a horn, and the faint rustle of the wind. She turned her head slightly, her expression calm but firm. "Is there a problem?" she asked, her voice steady and clear. The bikers paused, caught off guard by her response. They had expected silence, maybe fear, but not this quiet, unwavering confidence. The tall biker recovered quickly, his smirk returning. "No problem, lady. Just saying you should watch where you're going. Don't want to trip over something." Lucy didn't reply. She simply adjusted her grip on Max's harness and prepared to move forward. As she took a step, another biker muttered, loud enough for her to hear, "Blind people shouldn't be out here alone anyway. It's dangerous." Max's ears perked up again, and he let out another soft growl. This time, Lucy didn't shush him right away. Instead, she let it linger for a moment, a subtle reminder that Max was far from helpless. Then she spoke, her voice calm but firm. "Dangerous for who?" Her question hung in the air, and for a moment, the bikers were silent. Finally, the tall one chuckled nervously, scratching the back of his neck. "All right, lady. Take it easy. Just joking around." Lucy didn't respond. She didn't need to. With Max leading the way, she stepped forward, her pace steady and unbroken. The bikers watched as she passed, their laughter now subdued, their voices quieter. As they moved farther from the garage, Lucy reached down and gently patted Max on the head. "Good boy," she said softly. Max wagged his tail once, his focus unwavering. He had done his job, as he always did, and Lucy felt a deep gratitude for his presence. Behind them, the bikers stood in silence, watching her disappear into the distance. They didn't know what they had just encountered, didn't know the history, the strength, or the quiet power that Lucy and Max carried with them. But they had felt it. And it left them unsettled. The air grew heavier as the tension thickened. The first biker, the tall one with the scruffy beard, leaned against his bike and smirked as Lucy walked by. But then, he decided to up the ante. With a loud twist of his wrist, he revved his engine. The motorcycle roared, and a thick cloud of exhaust puffed out, swirling into the air and drifting toward Lucy and Max. Max stopped abruptly, his body rigid. His head lowered slightly as he assessed the sound and the scent. Lucy, unfazed, gave his harness a reassuring squeeze. "Forward," she said softly, her voice steady and calm. Max obeyed, his movements precise as always, guiding her through the haze. But the bikers weren't done. Another one, shorter and stockier with a toothy grin, mounted his bike and started circling them. His engine growled as he rode in slow, deliberate loops around Lucy and Max, his laughter loud and mocking. "Careful, lady. Don't trip," he shouted, his voice dripping with sarcasm. Lucy remained calm. She didn't flinch or hesitate, her steps measured and deliberate. Her grip on Max's harness remained firm but relaxed. Her cane tapped the pavement rhythmically, steady as her heartbeat. What the bikers didn't see was Max's reaction. He wasn't just guiding Lucy anymore, he was protecting her. His posture was sharp, almost military in its precision. His eyes flicked toward every movement, his ears perked to every sound. He wasn't just a guide dog, he was a sentinel, a guardian. From the garage's shadowy interior, a figure stood silently. An older man, weathered and grizzled, leaned against the wall. His face was creased with lines that spoke of years lived hard. His eyes narrowed as he observed the scene outside. At first, the man seemed disinterested, like he'd seen this kind of behavior 100 times before. But then his gaze settled on Max. The dog's movements caught his attention, the way he held himself, the way he shifted his weight, the way his focus never wavered from the bikers. The older man straightened slightly, his interest peaked. Something about the dog felt familiar. A memory flickered in his mind: hot desert winds, the scent of sand and sweat, and the sound of gunfire. And then, a dog. A dog that moved like this one, disciplined and fearless, weaving through chaos to save lives. Could it be? Outside, the harassment continued. The biker circling Lucy slowed his bike, cutting close enough that his tires barely missed her cane. He laughed again, loud and cruel. "You scared yet, lady?" Lucy stopped walking, her head tilting slightly as if she were listening to something in the distance. Her expression remained unreadable, calm but firm. "Max," she said quietly, the single word carrying more weight than any shouted command. Max stood still, his body like a coiled spring. His gaze locked onto the biker, assessing every movement, every sound. The biker noticed the dog's stance and laughed nervously. "What's your dog gonna do, huh? Bark me to death?" he sneered. Lucy didn't respond. Instead, she took a small step forward, her cane tapping the pavement with quiet determination. The tall biker revved his engine again, the roar cutting through the street. "Hey, lady, maybe you should just turn around. This isn't your neighborhood." Inside the garage, the older man pushed off the wall and stepped closer to the open doors. His gaze was fixed on Max now, his mind racing. He had seen dogs like this before, not in places like this, but in battle. He could tell from the way Max moved, the way he held himself, that this wasn't just any guide dog. Back outside, Lucy moved forward again, undeterred. Her calmness seemed to unsettle the bikers. They had expected fear, maybe anger, but not this quiet, steady resolve. The shorter biker revved his engine again and made another loop around her, his laughter faltering slightly. "You got guts, I'll give you that," he muttered. Max let out a soft growl, low and rumbling, just enough to send a shiver up the biker's spine. He instinctively pulled his bike back a little, his confidence wavering. The tall biker noticed. "What's the matter, Jimmy? Afraid of a dog?" he teased, trying to regain control of the situation. But the older man in the garage took a step forward, his voice cutting through the noise. "Knock it off, boys," he said, his tone firm and commanding. The bikers turned toward him, surprised. The man rarely got involved in their antics. "What's the big deal, old man?" the tall biker called out, his voice tinged with annoyance. The older man ignored him. He stepped closer, his eyes locked on Max. Then he looked at Lucy. "Ma'am," he said, his voice softer now, respectful. "That's no ordinary dog you've got there." Lucy tilted her head slightly in his direction, curious but cautious. She didn't respond, waiting for him to explain. The man nodded toward Max. "I've seen dogs like him before. Military dogs. War heroes. Is he one of them?" The bikers exchanged confused looks. Lucy hesitated for a moment, then said simply, "He's special." The older man chuckled softly, shaking his head. "Special doesn't even begin to cover it," he muttered. Then he turned to the bikers, his expression hardening. "You boys have no idea what you're messing with." The bikers looked at each other, their bravado fading. The older man crossed his arms and nodded toward Lucy. "Show some respect. Both of them have earned it." The tall biker grumbled under his breath but said nothing. The shorter one backed his bike away, avoiding eye contact. Lucy gave Max's harness a gentle tug, and they continued on their way. Max's posture relaxed slightly, but his focus remained sharp. Behind them, the bikers watched in silence, their earlier arrogance replaced by unease. The older man stood at the garage door, his gaze following Lucy and Max as they disappeared into the distance. A faint smile touched his lips. He didn't know their full story, but he didn't need to. He could see it in the way they moved, in the quiet strength they carried. They were more than they seemed. And the bikers? They would think twice before crossing paths with them again. The tension had been simmering, but now it was ready to boil over. One of the bikers, tall and broad-shouldered, stepped forward with a cocky grin. He placed himself squarely in Lucy's path, his boots scraping against the asphalt. The others watched, smirking and egging him on with nods and muttered words. "Come on, lady," he said, his tone mocking and full of false bravado. "Just say please, and we'll let you through. That's not too hard, is it?" Lucy stopped walking. For the first time, she stood perfectly still, her cane resting lightly in her hand. Slowly, she turned her face toward the group, her expression unreadable behind her dark glasses. Her voice, when she spoke, was calm but firm, carrying an edge that cut through the laughter around her. "You've had your fun. Now, step aside." For a moment, the biker hesitated. There was something about her tone, something that made him pause. But his pride wouldn't let him back down in front of his friends. He laughed instead, a harsh, forced sound, and took a step closer. "What if I don't?" he sneered. "What are you gonna do about it, huh? What's your little dog gonna do?" Max had been quiet until now, standing at Lucy's side with his body taut like a bowstring. His eyes were locked on the biker, calculating, waiting. The biker leaned in closer, his smirk widening. But before he could say another word, Max lunged. It happened so fast that no one had time to react. Max didn't aim for the man, he didn't need to. Instead, he went for the tire of the nearest motorcycle. His powerful jaws clamped down on the rubber, and with one swift, decisive bite, he punctured it. The sound of air hissing out of the tire cut through the silence like a sharp blade. The biker stumbled back, his smirk replaced by shock. "What the?" he stammered, looking from Max to his now flat tire. Max stood his ground, his teeth bared in a silent warning. He didn't bark or growl. He didn't need to. His message was clear: enough was enough. The group of bikers fell silent, their earlier bravado evaporating in the face of Max's display. They exchanged uneasy glances, their confidence shaken. And then, from the shadows of the garage, the older man stepped out. His boots clicked against the pavement as he walked forward, his face hard and lined with experience. "Stand down, boys," he said, his voice low but commanding. The tall biker turned to him, his expression confused and defensive. "What are you talking about, old man? It's just a dog." The older man cut him off with a sharp gesture. "Just a dog," he repeated, his tone incredulous. He pointed at Max. "Do you even know what you're messing with? That's no ordinary dog." The bikers exchanged puzzled looks, their earlier bravado replaced by a growing unease. The older man took another step forward, his gaze never leaving Max. "That dog," he said, his voice steady and full of authority, "is a war hero. Saved my team from an ambush years ago. I'd bet my life on it." The group fell silent, their faces a mixture of disbelief and fear. The tall biker shook his head, trying to regain his composure. "You're kidding, right? It's just some guide dog." The older man didn't let him finish. "Look at him," he snapped, his voice rising slightly. "The way he moves, the way he watches. That's not something you can train out of a book. That's years of experience, years of saving lives. And you're out here taunting him like a fool." The bikers shifted uncomfortably, their earlier confidence crumbling under the weight of the man's words. Lucy, who had been silent until now, finally spoke. Her voice was sharper this time, cutting through the tension like a blade. "You didn't see us. You didn't know us. Now, move." The tall biker opened his mouth to argue, but the older man shot him a look that silenced him immediately. "Let them go," the older man said firmly. "Now." One by one, the bikers stepped back, clearing the path. Their faces were pale, their earlier arrogance replaced by a mix of shame and fear. Lucy gave Max's harness a gentle tug, and they began to move forward again. Her steps were steady, her head held high. Max walked beside her, calm and composed, his focus never wavering. As they passed the older man, Lucy paused for a moment. "Thank you," she said softly. The man nodded, his expression softening. "No, ma'am." "Thank you," he replied. His gaze shifted to Max, a small, almost reverent smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "You take care of her, boy," he said quietly. Max wagged his tail once, a small but deliberate gesture. As Lucy and Max disappeared down the street, the older man turned back to the bikers. "You boys got lucky," he said, his tone stern. "You don't mess with people like her. Or dogs like him." The bikers nodded silently, their heads lowered. And with that, the moment passed. But for everyone involved, it was a moment they wouldn't soon forget. The bikers stood frozen for a moment, their tough expressions replaced by unease. The mocking laughter that had echoed moments ago was gone. Now, there was only the sound of the wind, the faint hum of distant traffic, and the sharp memory of Max's display. One by one, the bikers began to scatter. The tall one, who had tried to block Lucy's path, stepped back first, avoiding the gaze of the older man. He muttered something under his breath, but it wasn't a snarky remark this time. It was more like an apology that he wasn't brave enough to say out loud. The shorter biker with the toothy grin pushed his motorcycle away, his face pale and his hands trembling slightly as he fiddled with his helmet. The others followed, their movements slow and hesitant. They had come to this place full of swagger, but now, their pride was in pieces. Max stood by Lucy's side, calm and steady as ever. His work was done, but his watchful eyes remained sharp. He glanced at each biker as they moved away, silently ensuring they truly left. From the edge of the garage, the older man stepped forward. His boots scuffed the pavement as he walked toward Lucy. He wasn't in a hurry. His steps were deliberate, as if he was taking in the scene, letting it sink in. When he reached her, he tipped his hat, a gesture of respect and gratitude. "Ma'am," he said, his voice low and steady, "I owe you and Max my life. If there's ever anything you need." Lucy tilted her head slightly in his direction, listening to the weight in his words. She didn't reply immediately. Instead, she let the silence stretch for a moment, her hand resting lightly on Max's harness. Finally, she spoke, her voice soft but resolute. "We're fine," she said, and for the first time, a rare smile touched her lips. It wasn't a big smile, but it was genuine, and it carried a warmth that matched her calm demeanor. "Just keep them in line." The older man nodded, his expression thoughtful. "You've got my word on that, ma'am." Lucy gave him a small nod in return and then turned, ready to continue